Hello, and welcome to day one of ePharma Digital Week. In just a moment, we will be hearing from the following speakers: Dawn Lockelade, Chief of Social Strategy and Vice President of Healthcare at LiveWorld, and Jenna Dengrove, Vice President and Creative Director at LiveWorld, followed by Sven Detlef, Executive Vice President of Global Marketing Portfolio at Teva Pharmaceuticals. My name is Michaela Dietrich with ePharma, and I will be your moderator for today's event. Before we begin, let me explain how you can participate in the presentation. First of all, if you have any technical difficulties during today's session, please press the Help button on your player console to receive assistance in solving common issues. We will welcome your questions during the webinar. In order to submit your questions to today's presenter, please type your question into the question window on the left-hand side of your screen and hit the Submit button. Please be sure to indicate who the question is for, so we can direct the questions accordingly. We'll be answering as many questions as possible during the Q&A session that will follow the main presentation, but please feel free to send in your questions at any time, and we'll add them to the queue. If at any time you are having audio difficulties, simply hit your F5 to refresh your webcast console. Today's session is being recorded and will be available beginning tomorrow, and you'll be notified via email when the recording is available. And now, to kick off our presentation, I welcome Dawn Lockelade, Chief of Social Strategy and VP of Healthcare at LiveWorld, and Jenna Dengrove, VP and Creative Director at LiveWorld. The floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. This is Dawn, and we're excited to get to chat with you a little bit today about some boring, some boring compliance topics, that would be me, and some really interesting creative executions, that would be Jenna. So let's start with just a little bit of information about us, so you have some understanding of where we come from with this guidance and these pieces of advice. We currently manage just over 250 social media program pages in the pharma space for our various clients that range in size from very large pharma companies to single drug, rare disease pharma companies. And so we have a lot of experience with compliance, both from a creative execution perspective all the way through to a monitoring and identification of adverse events. So a couple of quick caveats before we dive into the presentation too far. We've included some selections in here as examples. We also reference other selections as we talk. Some of these are clients, some aren't, some are just randomly selected. We don't intend to offend anybody if we happen to suggest that there are opportunities to do stuff different, more, better, or different things. And of course, any guidance or recommendations or examples that we show here wouldn't replace using your MRL team to review any content you create. So just to lay the framework for our compliance conversation here, I know we often think about the considerations that go into being compliant, whether it's from an FDA or an FTC perspective, as guardrails or challenges that we need to overcome in order to be successful in these channels. But it's important for us to remember that while these channels have a huge amount of value to us as the companies, what the FDA and the other compliance organizations are really looking for from us is exactly what they've always been looking for from us. It's just different and a little bit harder to do in these very small spaces. So the same kinds of things that we were using when we were creating other types of ads, we need to make sure that the ads have fair and balance of information. We need to make sure that we are not endorsing content that other people post that's off-label or doesn't have fair balance. We need to watch for prompting. If we're inviting people to give user-generated content, it's very important to balance the way that you ask that question and not lead them to give you only positive endorsements of the product. And of course, it's important for us to disclose any relationships that we have with folks, influencers, for example, or patient organizations or things like that. So we're going to show examples that include these different topics. I just wanted to give you a quick up with the topics themselves. So as a grounding for our conversation, this is just quick guidance on when you do and don't need important safety information in the post itself. This is just broad swaths. You might have more specific guidance for your particular organization, but the overarching understanding is that you do not need full safety unless you have both the brand name and either the indication or a claim. And so there are several instances. We'll give a couple of examples of reminder type ads in here and some unbranded ads as well, but this just lays the foundation from when you need to include it. It's also important to note that the full version of your ISI is supposed to be one click away, and that all of that safety information needs to travel with the post, which can be a little challenging when you have a platform like Facebook that allows you to share things 25 different ways. And we've also included this fabulous quick reference chart that just shows you some of the top platforms that we tend to use in the pharma space and gives you a quick idea of what their good and what their challenging components are for each platform. Now, I'm not going to spend much time here because we're actually going to look at some examples that illustrate these points on the next few slides, but great if you have a chance to go back and take a look at this when you get the video of this session. So let's start with Facebook, since the bulk of social in the pharma space is on Facebook. It's a good platform choice for us because it has significant options in terms of targeting and ad types, and it also attracts the most of our core audiences in terms of age range. And so there's a couple different ways you can execute, and we're looking for the same components in these different executions. You're looking for the compliance pieces, the important safety information, the ISI-PI link. You're also looking for the content, the brand value content, which here is in the center in that video, a little bit in the copy at the top, and then the destination link at the bottom. Now, I wanted to show you this one and kind of call out the features so that you can also understand that these different examples have the same features in them. They're just organized in slightly different ways. So on these, the body copy of the post has been completely used to communicate ISI and PI partially displayed. And the copy that shares the message from the brand is actually a part of the video or the content component itself. So where to turn on the left-hand example from Eloquis is a visual copy element that is embedded in the video itself. So instead of having part of the video be the scrolling ISI, they have flipped it in these examples, and they have the ISI-PI at the top and use the video for both the visual and the written copy. So there are different configurations and ways that you can organize your content. It's the features that need to be the same and the balance of weight that they carry. Instagram is a very different challenge for us because it only has a single link out, and it has relatively limited options for where you place things. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples of how to execute LinkedIn. How to execute Instagram. So in this example, this is using a carousel, and the ISI is there if you swipe right. So the messaging in the black box, although I know it's small and hard to see, says swipe right to see the ISI and PI, and it's as you swipe to the right, you get to see the full ISI and PI. And then if you click on the more, you actually see an expanded version of the statement, the base ISI and PI statement. Second example for Instagram solutions, this one uses what is called a light box, so that when somebody clicks on the link to learn more or whatever your call to action is, it actually opens the branded website with a pop-up box, for lack of a better word to describe it, that gives the ISI. When somebody clicks on to close that box, it shows the brand page, the branded web page itself, so that you still get the benefit of functionally having two links, or having the link that goes to your branded content and the link that goes to the ISI-PI. So there's value there to that. So let's talk about Twitter for a minute, and we're going to work through each of these channels pretty rapidly, but happy to share additional examples or answer questions either in the chat for this or in Messenger after the fact. So this is a reminder type ad, and so it doesn't have the ISI and PI like we looked at for the components. And it has so it's a little bit more simplified. We have a video that embeds the ISI and PI at the end with just a primary statement in the wording. And then the third example for Twitter is much more like what we saw in the Facebook examples, which has become somewhat an industry standard, which is the content in the top half and the scrolling ISI in the bottom half of the ad itself. I also want to talk just for a second about two of our newer emerging platforms, although Snapchats, or as they call it now, Snap, has been around for a little bit. Snap is a really interesting option for us if what you're looking for is a younger audience. It's a highly engaging medium, and they have an ad type that is used as the primary option for pharma that doesn't allow comments. It doesn't, so there's no opportunity for people to put adverse events. There's no monitoring required for it. And this has been a successful ad type, and it looks somewhat similar. These are a couple of examples to the way that the other social platforms or social channels were formatted. It has the content on top and then the safety information on the bottom. Depending on the type of ad that you select, there are different inclusions in those, but it's a platform that I think is often overlooked because the nature of the platform is the temporary content. People assume that there's not a way to participate without that being the type of ad you're serving, and that's just not the case. So I just included a quick one slide here to share that. And the last example that we wanted to share here is TikTok, which I know has gotten a lot of fanfare and a lot of visibility lately. It has a broad swath of our young audience's attention at the moment. What's fascinating about this platform, from my perspective, from a strategic pharma use perspective, is the amount of educational content that we see on this platform about disease conditions. There are several doctors who have created very large followings that share information about their practice areas and their specialty areas. It is a young platform. Again, 70% of their audience is under 35 years old, and they have high interest in healthcare messages. And the video and highly entertaining and audience capturing format of it is really compelling for pharma type programs. There are several different ways you can be compliant inside of TikTok, and their healthcare team is actively working on other solutions that can help guide us to other ways to do it. But they are somewhat like an Instagram, where you find creative workarounds to ensure that you have all of the pieces. But there are examples of how that is done that they can share with you if you're interested in talking to TikTok's healthcare team about ads. So we just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about compliance. Now we've asked Jenna to take us through how we can make creative that is interesting and engaging. But sometimes I think we get a little too caught up in compliance and a little too rigid about how things look and how things work. And we limit our team's ability to really execute vibrant and interesting creative. So Jenna?
Excellent, thanks, Dawn. So clearly there are some different approaches and ways in terms of creating content specifically for healthcare and pharma marketing, but we have so many pathways in terms of compliance approaches that Dawn pointed out. So then when we get into the creative portion of the exploration, the main thing is to really work to find creative that connects and engages with audiences to drive them to have actions or take actions that have value for you as the brand. So the first thing we want to talk about is, what do patients expect? And the first thing they want is for brands to feel like they're understanding them. They're understanding the condition that they have, the journey they're going through, their day-to-day, and reflect that in the creative that we're serving to them. So the first example here that we have is a migraine website. Obviously, migraine is a highly competitive space. And if you suffer from migraines, you know that when they hit, it often means sitting in a dark, quiet room where even the light from your cell phone screen can seem as bright as the sun in those moments. And so as you can see here, first, we aim to connect with patients and reflect their reality and not shy away and not sugarcoat and not have some happy, smiling person starting off who's, you know, just living life to the fullest. We want to make sure we tell patients, we hear you, we understand what you're going through. And then we can position our medication or solution as a way to help them see past the situation with the dark room and to what life can be and the possibilities ahead. The second thing is to really try to leverage where we can real stories to deepen relationships with our targets, and highlighting those experiences allows us to create common ground, which can then put our audiences in the mindset where they're more receptive to whatever desired behaviors and actions we're suggesting for them to take. So even something as simple as like a quote card, which is on the left-hand side here, can be very effective at doing that when it feels authentic and genuine. And the technique isn't just for patients here. On the right is an example that has been leveraged for the healthcare provider audience, where we've taken interviews about how, in this particular example, a current standard of care for a condition had previously really failed the target audience, which was women, and how that has become the motivation for these doctors to find a new solution. And by speaking to them in a way that feels personal and authentic and genuine, it builds this sort of shared bond amongst doctors in the same way that we're trying to build that shared bond amongst patients. And that's feeling like you're connected and feeling like you share sort of a common bond and a common goal is what really encourages people to take the next step, which is action, and whatever that action is that we might want them to take. So the next piece of the puzzle is telling my story. And people, often ask me, I often allude to when people ask, what is my job? What is my role? And I say, I don't actually, my goal is to tell stories. I'm a storyteller. I'm not making ads. I'm communicating and telling and reflecting people's stories and experiences. So finding content that builds this connection can come in a couple of different ways. There's probably a lot of opportunity to take content that might already exist and really reinvent that and look at it from a new perspective. So I always encourage, start from what you already have. And this video animation, which I'll play in a second, is an example of a spin-off of some patient testimonial video content that we had. And I'll play this here. So the original content here was actually very, very long. There were 7+ minute videos of patient stories. And while that worked really well on the .com and for web, it was not really going to adhere to best practices for social. So normally what you would probably do if you had a long video like that is you would extract a short soundbite from the video, and you would probably do a video cut down of it. In this particular case, that wasn't doable because of a couple of various reasons. So what we did was we created that really dynamic and engaging piece of content that was animated, which worked really well for us because it gave us the ability to say in a very condensed way the phrase and the content we wanted to say. But also, one of the benefits was because most of the people who are on social, and leading busy lives are watching the video without sound. This is a way you can, what I call, listen with your eyes. So it moves through the story in a way that was visually appealing and didn't require an audio backup. We did have audio to that. We turned it off for the sake of this presentation, but you can see how well it works even without that. the other thing is to remember that there's nothing like hearing right from the source. And when we have actual testimonial style video content, there's almost nothing that can beat that. So this particular example here is a story of a doctor who actually treated cancer patients and then was diagnosed with cancer and became a patient himself. And it created this amazing and truly motivating perspective and piece of content that only he could have given. So where we can use video effectively, it's a really powerful tool. And even though right now we're dealing with the pandemic and there's a lot of challenges to getting video content in the ways that we're, traditionally used to thinking of content captures, we actually have here at LiveWorld been developing some solutions to do remote video shoots very successfully. And if you have questions about that or want to follow up with us after this presentation, please feel free to do so. We'd love to share it with you. And then finally, patients, at the end of the day, they want to be entertained, whether it's making them laugh or challenging what they know or really just making sure we're not underestimating the element of surprise. So to do this sometimes means that you have to look at a situation through another set of eyes. In the example on the left here, we're actually trying to reach a male target audience to get them to go in for a medical test that's extremely relevant and timely for them to get. But through some research and insights, we realized that a lot of these men are not self-motivated to go seek out medical care. And it's often a spouse or a partner who's driving them to seek or make that appointment for the care they need. So we took that insight and embraced it and created several ads, this being one of them, where the post was actually directed at women with this sort of cheeky headline, "Permission to nag him granted." The example on the right is an example where we have taken some data from a research study that was done, and we've built a quiz. We have actually seen time and time again that this type of approach on social is some of not only our top performing social content, but also is a top driver of visits from social to web. When we can drive them from either a quiz to a really interesting piece of content on the web, or from what seems like a quiz question on social to a full quiz on the website, it's incredibly, incredibly successful and compelling. So we can really capture and tap into their innate desire to compete with one another. We even have a function at the end of the quiz where they can share their score, very much like you would a BuzzFeed news article, see if you can beat my score or top this. And that, again, is another way to draw additional audience members in. We've even actually internally created a widget because we've seen this need come up where we've been able to create a method and that allows us to implement a quiz iframe on a website and update the questions and the artwork as frequently as every quarter so we can keep the content fresh because we know this is a high value action and something that people will keep coming back to participate in. And finally, an example of creating content that captures attention, and surprises. This campaign is an example of how we can take something unexpected, like I want to do more dirty dishes, and create a hook with that tells this story of what you can gain by getting more time from this particular treatment with your family. So even like the mundane tasks that you take for granted normally are valuable for this particular patient population and more achievable because of the treatment that we were offering. So in a sea of sameness, the idea that someone might want more dirty dishes or anything that would seem negative to us, more broken toys or more wrinkles or doing more laundry, things like that, can actually really stand out and capture people's attention. And really, we just need to hook them for a couple of seconds, and that shows that we can drive actions for a brand. So with that, I'll turn it back to Dawn for a couple of more thoughts.
Or even step on more Legos, I think was one of the other executions from that campaign. Yep. It was particularly compelling because it stopped everybody's attention. And we know scrolling on Facebook is all about trying to capture people's attention. And so those sorts of messages are great for capturing that attention. So just a couple of notes on the other end of compliance, not just creating the compliant content, but engaging and monitoring and moderating content and comments that people have coming in. There are several ways to set up programs to make these reviews. Everything from creating digital acceleration, where we create guidelines for the production of social content that include all of the components that we talked about earlier. We can do training by channel, and we find this very successful to actually not only train your marketing folks who are interested in a new channel on the channel itself, what compliant execution looks like, how to be compliant about moderation and response, but also to train the MLRC team members on those channels as well. In advance of actually having your program to share, now they understand the channel, they know how it works, especially if your reviewers aren't digital natives, aren't folks who are comfortable in the social spaces. And then, of course, one of the other techniques that's hugely helpful is much like what we've done today, which is sharing examples so that the other teams are very comfortable with what review looks like. And when you get to monitoring and allowing comments, so many platform channels, comments are required, but they're preferred in so many channels either way. And there are great ways for us to monitor and respond to content. And you have a burden to do this monitoring if you own the property, if you have created or had any sort of participation or influence over the content at all. So influencer content, spokespeople, industry associations, patient organizations, all of those types of things. So monitoring and identification of adverse events, responding to and answering questions about your product so that you know there's credible medical information out there. All of those things are an important piece of this compliance puzzle, and something that we do for our clients as well. So I know we only had 30 minutes for this presentation, so there are certainly several questions and types of things that you might like to ask us, whether it's about strategy and some of the things we mentioned about digital acceleration that we've done for large companies like AbbVie, or if it's process laying out regulatory processes and training, or even execution of how to create brilliant content. We would be happy to share information about that. So that being said, I think we have a couple of questions.
Thank you guys for a great presentation. So our first question is, are separate HCP and patient Facebook pages required in order to market them separately?
No, and I'll to be specific, with it depends on which platform you're talking about. If it's most platforms allow us the ability to create hidden or dark content that can be targeted at various different audiences, and that lets us have a single page. For example, the drug name would be the name of your page or program page that produces content that directs it to different audiences, whether it's different audiences for different indications, if you have multiple indications, or different audiences because some are for HCP and some are for patient. So as a whole, that shouldn't be a concern. You shouldn't have to maintain two different profiles. One caveat I will say is, unless you want to have a profile that is specific and participates in and is involved in events that is for HCPs as a whole, that covers a treatment area instead of a specific drug, then there are some considerations for having a brand name specialty area handle, a company name specialty area handle. But as a whole, the answer is you can get away with one single site and minimize the amount of work you have to do and the amount of sites you have to maintain.
Thank you. And our next question is for Dawn. Have you had the opportunity to educate the MLR PRC teams for your clients on the different platforms on space limitations to get them comfortable with your level of compliance? understanding? And if so, has that improved the ability to get these types of pieces approved more efficiently?
Absolutely, doing the education up front is a huge value, and talking through, especially in space-constrained platforms, how and where your safety information is going to be, what are the limitations and guardrails of what you can say, getting all of that established before you actually produce a piece of content and having everybody on board is a huge, huge help. And talking through the considerations, especially since often these platforms are ones that our MRL colleagues haven't participated on, and helping them understand that, for example, saying ISI PI link in bio versus having it be in the piece of content is industry standard. So the second piece that I would say there that's so critically important is that you make sure you have relevant examples from other pharma companies as to how they're executing. And those, we certainly keep a repository of those examples and are happy to share, but there's also some websites out there that track those. And then the healthcare teams at any of these platforms will gladly share with you some examples to use for your MRL team to understand how it's being done. There's a little bit of safety in numbers here, and that helps a lot with moving your conversation.
I'll also add that making that a collaborative process is extremely important, and we can offer suggestions and guidance, but having that process be a discussion is extremely valuable and helpful.
Okay, thank you. It